It's a bit. Well, let me start by thanking you for the invitation, and also let me start also by introducing myself. I have been working for the IMF since 2012. Before that, I was a professor at Complutense University, university with a campus in Madrid, very similar to this one, by the way. So this reminds me of my period there, which was a period of almost 10 years. I am originally not an expert on trade, although I am an expert. I mean, my field of specialization was international economics. I was there at the Complutense Institute of International Economics. That was the time in which I met first Professor Guerrieri in one of the. Of course, he was a professor already. I was much younger, starting to become a professor at the time when all the Lisbon strategy and all this thing in the early 2000s, and there was this discussion still going on, and the world was not similar to what we see today. So I think what this conference is showing is that precisely we're at a juncture, at a moment in which, well, things have to be rethought, and probably in the early 2000s, none of us would be seeing a disruption of the global order in terms of trade. We probably were expecting constant liberalization, some sort of a regime change towards liberalization going on, despite of the failure of the Doha round. So what I'm going to present today is a paper that the European Department produced and was published in June. And this is the last in a series of papers that the IMF has been doing. For the last 10 years, you have to think that the IMF has not been typically considering trade-related issues unless they were of macrocritical importance, meaning unless a trade war or trade disruptions could create problems in the financial systems so as to affect the balance of payment dramatically of any country that could then be willing to request a loan and therefore, or would be needing, help. That was kind of the idea, from the beginning. Then it is true that since the crisis in 2008, the members, meaning the nation states being part of the board, and the IMF asked the IMF to focus more resources, meaning intellectual resources, in terms of thinking about trade. So since 2009 until now, almost 10 years, the IMF has devoted resources, hiring consultants, or just retraining their own staff, and basically issuing more papers on trade. This has been done on different fronts. To advise countries when they were asking for loans, advise them, but that has been less of a role. And then doing papers on the research department or the area departments, meaning European or Asia Pacific or African, on different aspects of trade. For example, an area which was developed very much was the area in which the IMF was advising countries in Africa how to raise money from taxes that they imposed on imports coming into their countries, either to get rid of them or if they were not willing to get rid of them, basically to make them at least not as distortive. So this is just to give you a background. The European Department had not done papers on trade issues for many, many years. And only in the last 2 years, precisely because of the trade tensions between China and the US, this is when we started to do something. So we thought, okay, so what do? Should we just go one more time to say, okay, free trade is good or it's bad, and under these circumstances go theoretical? No, okay, let's try to explore the data and go empirical. That was the approach. At the same time, we didn't want to focus, because that was not the purpose of our department, on the whole economy. We just wanted to look at, and this is what the paper does, how the trade tensions between US and China could affect Europe. If you want to take a look, so my first message here, if you want to take a look at a deeper, more global analysis, I recommend you to go to a sister publication that we produce at the IMF called the World Economic Outlook, which was published in April, so just 2 months before our publication, which uses the GIMF, so the global model that we have, a general equilibrium model that we have, to try to see how impact how tariffs in one part of the world would impact the other one, and the trade diversion, and basically how this would affect different economies. Here the focus is on Europe. And then let me start by summarizing basically what is this project about. Basically, it is motivated by recent trade tensions with a focus on Europe. So we want to know how Europe is going to be affected by all this. Again, as said at the beginning, we are seeing that this is evolving, although the recent ruling by the World Trade Organization in terms of Airbus and then additional tariffs on agricultural products is not the result, the immediate result of the trade tensions between China and the US. It comes from before, as Professor Guerrero was saying. Still, this just adds one more layer into the trade tensions that we are confronting. The objective in this case is basically to estimate the impact of these shocks, but not based on gross measures of trade. And I will go in a minute into what are we talking about here. I assume that you all know this is, but again, since this, I will just do the effort to try to explain you the differences between the different statistics. So try to see if, precisely as was in the round of questions raised before, so global value chains are complex issues because they are not about countries themselves or about final products. They just entail the whole set of firms involved in different, and workers involved in the different stages of producing every single output, every single product, okay? So then we use two different databases. As you know, there are around 3 databases, input-output tables that collect data on countries, sectors at different, with different degree of depth, no? We didn't use TIVA, which is the one that everybody uses, which is the OECD. We wanted to use WIOD and EURA. I'll explain why, which is because it was offering us more capacity to exploit the data better. And we developed 3 frameworks, which are the 3 chapters in the publication. Okay, so the publication is this one. You will see it if you Google it. So it is basically, as you see, so it is this one. When you see the IMF or World Bank or whatever, OECD or any international organization, when you see, if you're looking for academic papers, you will see boring, non-color type of publications. Okay, just and then it'll have introductions. We'll go into the model, few equations, and then go into straight. And this is what we different researchers would publish before just sending to a journal, like you guys would do in the academia. If you see these colorful things, then they would have executive summary, just a little bit more user-friendly for journalists. Of course, no equation. All equations will be at the end in an annex, so that nobody pays attention to them. And then it'll have these charts that I will be showing some of them, and which are heavily replicated by the Financial Times or the Economist or so on and so forth, or think tankers. No, so that is. What characterizes this publication is not only the colorful thing, it's just that it combines different approaches, whereas in a more academic paper, you would not do that typically. So what we do here is one chapter has a network analysis of the impact on Europe, another one shows the results of a semi-structural demand model, and then the last one is a 2-step macroeconometric model about growth spillovers. So the first 2 chapters there are about really trade shock, and the one is about growth shock related to any disruption on trade, okay? The main conclusion, in case you just want to go to the coffee or whatever, or just you get bored or you go into your iPhones or whatever, is that if we really want to be serious about looking at the impact on Europe, we have to use value-added statistics. If we go with gross exports statistics, then we would say, okay, this is going to be the picture on Europe, and we're going to be mistaken in terms of the size and in terms of the distribution per country. Okay, so as a result, this is the first result. The second result is that Germany is not such a crucial player here, but Europe should be more worried about, not about how the trade tensions affect us through Germany. Everybody thought about this because since the first tariffs announced were on cars and car parts, people thought about, okay, so this is going to affect Germany, and Germany is the engine of Europe, so therefore you affect the car has an engine, Germany is the engine, so we are all going to be affected. Well, of course, there is going to be an impact, but it's not as high. We should be more worried about the direct impact of the shocks coming from the US or from China if they fight each other coming into our own countries, because we provide many of those intermediates and final products, okay? So these are the two main messages. Now I'm gonna go in a little bit deeper into how do we get to these conclusions. And I'm going to ask you please to interrupt me, because if I see myself talking too much, I'm going to arrive to the conclusion. I'm not going to do what I used to do in my old classes, which was just to go around and wake up people. So just I'm going to arrive to the conclusion that I am either not expressing myself correctly and you have disconnected. I will see that in the when I look at your eyes. If you're looking through me, that means that you're not following my thing. And also, it'll be too unilateral. Any of you could be where I am today, just presenting this. So let's just try to, make a dialogue. If you feel that you want to raise, don't wait until the end. I mean, let's try to do this informal, okay? Some basic concepts that allow me to go into some stylized facts. This is something that me and my colleagues put together based on a couple of publications, well, on 3 publications. And we tried to ourselves explain, because we wanted to explain to our colleagues, what is it that we were going to be talking about. Okay, so as you know, and you're experts in this, so you have to bear in mind that when we talk to our colleagues, some of them are experts in monetary economics or in public economics. So this is like when a cardiologist goes and tries to get funding or explain the results of their their analysis to somebody who is not an expert on the heart. Well, so gross exports, as you know, gross exports can be, if you export a car or if you export a window, well, I would say a car is more complicated than a window, then it is, when you sell something, it has 2 components, okay? So there is a domestic value added created that goes into that product, and something that is not produced by local Italian providers. Here, imagine we're talking about an Italian car. So it's not produced by local providers in Italy, but it's provided by somebody else. We buy the intermediate good, we put it there. Sometimes we put it in a piece and then we send it back and then we put it back in our car. Okay, so there's a foreign value added and a domestic value added. The foreign value added is what is called the backward linkages in global value chains, as you know, in the literature. And then within the domestic value added, embedded in every export, you have what is, things that are exported as final goods and things that are exported as intermediates, okay? So within the domestic value, we aggregate that and we call that value-added exports, okay? Of course, there are other parts which are exported as intermediates and they're further exported to a third country. And this is what is called forward linkages in the literature. So the reason why we presented this, it was just to try to follow, because publications mix a little bit the terms. For example, there is a very particular GVC participation index, Global Value Chain Participation Index, which is the sum of forward linkages and backward linkages. So forward linkages meaning everything that is exported as an intermediate to another country, which it is then re-exported to another country. And then the backward linkages is everything that comes into my export that comes from other country. Not of my nationality. Well, this was produced first by the World Bank in a report in 2013. It was then replicated, and it has been replicated. That index has been replicated many times, including by The Economist, this is just a way to motivate how embedded are countries into this forward and backward linkages in global value chains. Okay, so if we want to replicate that, we need to look at different sources. We have to go through the input-output tables, which is not easy. You have more vintages of different input-output tables, but this is something that was not available at the world level for many years. So the first one that we're using is EURA Embryo database, which provide data on input-output linkages for 190 countries. This is an amazing effort to put data together. It's a matrix that you rather use it in parts because you cannot use it all at the same time. You need lots of computer power there. And every time you run it, and even when you try to take matrices that combine a group of countries and a group of sectors, it is typically involving heavy accumulation of data. It of course goes wide in terms of countries, but not too deep in terms of sectors. It has 26 sectors, but of course they come aggregated. Then there is this other database, which is the World Input-Output Database, which is more recent and has 2 vintages going into the third one, which covers 43 countries, so a smaller amount of countries, and it goes deeper in the sectors. So depending on what we wanted to do or whether we wanted to compare ourselves to somebody else, we were using one or the other. What I'm going to be showing you is mostly based on EURA, although we did robustness on WIOD. Yes?
Silly question, do they overlap, especially in the sector part, since one is bigger than the other? So,
Yes, it's not a silly question. Actually, this is the question that I made myself because as I was telling you, so please, I ended up writing this report, but before doing that, I had lots of headaches. So I just went simple from the very simple thing, and if I didn't, what everybody would do, very simple and growing into complexity. Yes, they overlap, but for example, let me give you an example. We had manufacturing and automobiles in EURA, but we could not go into cars and car parts. So then the question is, Trump has announced tariffs, but is it affecting trucks or not? Is a truck a car or is it not? If you go into transport, then is it also affecting other things like airplanes? So again, first it's not clear. So when it's not clear the announcement and whether it would affect only cars and which car parts, because then in car parts, is it going to affect the wheels or the chairs or what is it? So the deeper you want to go, the more you want to go into WIOD. At the same time, the problem with WIOD is that we could not find, and that was the reason why we went into EURA, we could not find data for the bilateral relationships between Western European countries and Eastern European countries. We did not have Slovakia, Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland. Well, we had Poland, but not the rest. And that was really problematic because we wanted to look at the global value chains at the regional European level. And of course, as you know well, particularly in the case of cars, the relationship between Germany and Austria, but particularly Germany and Eastern Europe is very strong. So we had to go with EURA. No? More questions in this respect? Okay, so yeah, we were combining them depending on what we wanted to do. Okay, so it's just, but it was very good. Your question was very, very useful in this respect. Well, let me. Yes, acronyms which are here, and I can give it to you at the end of the presentation because MRIO is the Macro Rio International Operations Database or something like that, and then the other one is World Input-Output Database. The other one is clear. EURA is somewhere here, and I'm gonna. No, I learned it twice, but I always forget it. So I'll give it to you because it's here. It's here at the end. So we came up first with this Global Value Chains Participation Index. Let's look at how Europe has evolved with respect to the Americas and Asia in the last, since 2000 until the last data. Here, why do we put latest? Because with EURA, as you can see in the footnote, is 2013. We replicated this for WIOD, and it was 2016. And then in the end, publications department said, okay, you cannot put everything twice, so you just have to, depending on, so we're publishing some of the charts based on one database and some others in the other one. But as you can see, the main message here is that, and this is very important, about 70% of total European exports. So of everything that is exported from Europe out, and this is European countries, so we took the 28 members of the European Union, we look at their trade statistics, are their gross exports, everything that you send out, 70% of that is either forward or backward links to a global or regional value chain. So something that is not their own country related. Yes?
Does it include intra-European exports?
Very good. This one is double counting. You catch it immediately. Yes, it includes regional, regional trade. what happens here is that when you calculate these statistics for the Americas, you're including the American continent, but of course this is not 28 countries. The big ones are the three ones, Canada, Mexico, and the US, plus then Brazil and Argentina and Chile, Mexico. You get to maybe 6, 7 major players. Whereas in Europe, you have all these many countries, many statistics, and then lots of intra-regional trade. So when you do this, cleaning this, it comes a little bit lower, this bar, to the 50s, but it's still higher than in the Americas and than in Asia, okay? What we wanted to look at here is not the comparison in levels, but the comparison in trend. And what you see is that the GVC participation has increased in Europe about 10 percentage points in a little bit more than a decade, whereas that increase in the Americas and Asia was smaller. So the integration of Europe in global value chains, and this we maintain the number of countries. So the same 28 countries in 2000 and the same 28 countries in 2013 in this case were more subject to forward and backward linkages in their businesses and in their export activity than the other two blocks in the regional trade blocks. Just a way to illustrate that, well, GVC topic should be interested when we look at trade issues in the European perspective. Most of Europe's global value chain activity is concentrated in only a few sectors. Okay, the ones in red are three: manufacturing, transport and communications, and then of course retail and wholesale. But as you can see, it's mostly manufacturing. Okay. Most of the employment is also industrial employment is also there. As you can see, wholesale, retail, and trade down in that chart. Transport and communications and manufacturing. Something, and this is on the side, and then I recommend you, if you want to read about it, just go in the report, and there is a box about this issue of automation and robotization. So we came up with the idea 1 week, say, okay, so we also have this database on the number of robots per 1,000 workers produced by the International Federation of Robotics. We know that robotization happens in manufacturing mostly, and actually in Europe has been happening a lot in automobiles. So has there been a positive or a negative relationship? We didn't know. So we just plot this scatter plot because some people in the literature have been saying, okay, the more you robotize your production, the shorter are your value chains. Why? Because the reasoning behind value chains in Europe is like, okay, so I'm going to produce a car. So if this part is cheaper to be produced in the Czech Republic because they have cheaper labor, I send it there, then I bring it back, then I put the chip, then I send it somewhere else to assemble the car, and then I bring it here, and then I ship it. But it was only because workers were cheaper in the East. If now you robotize and you put a robot, then because it's even cheaper than having workers, then you would say, then the hypothesis, and this is an OECD report, is that robotization shortened the global value chains. Well, so far, we have not found that evidence, but it is true that this may be a recent, this may not be showing in the statistics that we are using, so that we don't know. So far until 2013, what you see is a positive relation. Again, many of the scattered plot, I mean, most of the points here in terms of robots per 1,000 employees are in zero, just because many countries have 0 robots per 1,000 employees, are not robotized at all. But among the countries that have robotization, you see a positive relation. Which way, we don't know. We have not explored that. I mean, this is an issue for a different paper, so if you're interested in doing that, just jump on it. Not many papers in the literature about that, but it is true that, more robotization, more participation in value chains, or more participation in value chains, more robotization, the way you want to explore it. But this is a positive relationship, yes.
You don't have it on the average length of the global value chain?
No, we don't. No, we don't, because for that, this is something very interesting. For that, you really have to choose which product you want to focus on. And we, being an international organization, it is already hard to do. Meaning hard is like when you focus on a problem, you have to justify why you focus on a continent and not in another continent. Here it was clear, because we wanted to focus on Europe, not because we were the European department, or myself, I'm a European, although there are only two Europeans in this team. It's just because it is obvious that we're in the middle of the sandwich between the US and China, and then you want to look at it. But otherwise, you have to find some sort of a consistent explanation. So we didn't go into that. It would have been only a paper in one or two products. It would have been very, very interesting to do that in car industry.
But there are some papers that look at the average length, because it's also possible to take the measures at other.
Yes, yes, you're totally right. You're totally right. Questions?
Do I understand correctly that
Yes.
you don't have any breakdown for manufacturing? You stop there?
We stop there, yes.
But that is quite obvious that manufacturing in the sector. there
Yes,
are
sure.
more
No, I mean, no, of course, no, we have more. It's just that I'm not showing more. Yeah, yes. No, of course, manufacturing, and then what type of manufacturer we go into. For example, when I present the a scenario on the cars, we just go into the cars, into the manufacturing of cars. Yes. We can break down. We have all the information. It's just that I'm showing here the aggregate data just to illustrate what the situation
It
is.
doesn't look very interesting just stopping at manufacturing.
Okay, we're in the 7th slide. Wait until we move forward. So, and again, you guys are expert on this. Our audience is a little bit wider, so forgive me if there's some things, not forgive me, just let's engage in the conversation, okay? Well, Europe is quite open, okay, but not as much as gross trade statistics would show. And this is the main message. What we wanted to show is because our policymakers, the ministers of finance that go into our meetings don't always know this. So what we see here is we break down exports by region and by type. And then what you can see in Europe, you see gross exports. This is exports that go outside the region in blue and within the region in orange. And this is precisely what you guys were asking. So most of it happens in Europe within the region. But even when you account for this double counting and you move into value-added data, what you see is that in Europe, 2/3 of that happen inside the region, and then only 1/3 happens, outside the region. The most important part of this message, what we wanted to emphasize, is that the difference between gross trade statistics, gross exports, and value-added exports is the largest in Europe. So for Europe, it is even more important to only use value-added data. 18 percentage points of difference, whereas the difference here, for example, for the Americas, is only 3 percentage points. So you would not make such a big mistake if you were using gross trade data, because in the Americas, those value chains, you don't see that much, except for the US and Mexico and partly Canada, this thing about sending things in and out, and you don't see that as much, okay? So, whereas in Europe, because of the internal market, you have that going on. So, main message here, the major difference in terms of gross data versus value-added data happens in Europe. So if you want to learn about trade exposure and possible consequences of a trade war, use value-added measures precisely when you want to talk about this for Europe. Again, a different way to show this. Then we talk about trade exposure, which is by showing the share of exports in value-added and in gross exports going from European countries to the 3 hubs countries. Meaning, so in Europe we look at Germany. In the Americas, the US is the main hub, and then of course in Asia the main hub is China. So here what these charts are showing is, on my right-hand side, is gross exports in percent of GDP, gross exports of Europe. This one. Okay, so in terms of exposure, we are exposed to the US, and then a lot to, we meaning all the European countries without counting Germany. So Europe, EU27 in this case, so 28 minus Germany, would be mostly exposed to Germany, and then to the US, and then to China. This is if you sit down with somebody looking at this gross trade statistics. When you look at this in value added, then you see that Europe, the EU27, is equally exposed, almost equally exposed to the US and to Germany. So Germany as a possible source of transmission of trade-related shocks is not such a big deal when you go from gross trade data to value-added data. Why is that? Because a lot of what is being exported from Germany to the rest of the world has value added produced in other countries, which are European countries. Okay, so this is important, an important way to look at it. Again, that difference is particularly important so advanced Europe appears very exposed to Germany, meaning Italy, Spain, France, appear like, okay, something happens to Germany because of this trade shock, we are going to be heavily impacted according to this, but maybe not that much according to, again, of course, we're talking about 10 percentage points of GDP, it's not small. I mean, this thing is almost 4 percentage, it's 3.5 percentage points of GDP. It's not a small amount, but it's not this almost 10 percentage points. Okay, so it's just a question in which we wanted to emphasize this precisely because so many publications, including from international organizations, have been throwing the wrong message. Okay, in this respect. Yes.
No, I have just like an issue, like Europe, like like I think if I think of the Netherlands, probably this is gonna like explode all the statistics because most of the goods that enter in Europe enter through the Netherlands or exit through the Netherlands. So how can you control for like if I'm exporting to the Netherlands just because it's enough to export to somewhere else, or can you control for that? Or
Yes, you can. I mean, basically, what you export to. So here, the way we produce the statistic, when we talk about the European Union 27, you look at the exports of the Netherlands, regardless of where they go. Again, we go back to this one. And then you look, when you look at, so when you say you want to produce a statistic for the European Union, how exposed are they to the US? That bar. If you look at the gross export, you're looking at this. So you're summing the gross exports to the US, all of them, the Netherlands to the US, Spain to the US, Italy to the US in terms of gross export. Including everything, but what happens is that includes value added created in the Netherlands, value added created in Italy, and also value added in the Netherlands coming from value added in Italy. But it's mixing something that like is coming from Japan. Okay, so that is the part that you have to take out if you want to keep it European. Okay, so that is why it is inflated. When you use gross exports, you are also including not only what comes from the European bloc, but what comes from China, from Japan, from Taiwan, that is embedded as foreign value added, which is a lot in many occasions. And that when you clean that bar comes down, even if not, of course, all the way down. Okay. Well, so now that I've introduced these concepts, which I think are always useful to refresh, I wanna bring you to the. Again, I'm summarizing here because the report is 77 pages, and I just wanted to use 30 slides. Okay, so I'm just bringing it down here, and then we can go into I don't know, deeper conversation if that is of your interest, and if not, we talk about something else. Okay, so the first exercise that we do is what you would try to do on your own. You say, okay, I am worried about the impact of a tariff of 25% on cars in Germany. So what would you do? You would say, okay, so what is the amount of cars being exported from Germany to somewhere? How are relative prices going to change? Because I impose a tariff, so if I don't know, the price is $20,000, then what would be the tariff? And then you would impose an elasticity, depending on, okay, so whatever is the amount in terms of the increase in euros or in dollars, then I assume that there is going to be a reduction in the amount. I would try to do something very simple like that. So, in order to do that, what we developed was a framework which is called network analysis. Basically, we extracted one sector within manufacturing, within all these 56 sectors, manufacturing, and then we went into car and car parts. We extracted the input-output data, the input-output table, looking at where the products are coming and going to, and assuming that there is this connection. That a tariff shock is in sector S, basically the cars, in country C, in this case we will look at Germany, although we show it then for the rest of the countries, would imply a lower demand for the exports of that sector, a lower demand of, of export of cars, German cars, of country C, Germany. That is the first effect, that is the direct effects, this is why it is in blue, and then there are the second round indirect effects, which is that tariff is going to impose a lower demand for domestic suppliers in Germany, domestic suppliers of parts to the cars in Germany, and then lower demand for the foreign suppliers and their suppliers. Okay, so this goes in circles. So network analysis, we have the references, allows you to decide how many times you want to go in circles here. Because it gets to a point in which you're not capturing anymore because the input-output table does not go into more detail. Okay, so typically with 2 rounds is enough. You can go even third rounds if you want to, but you don't gain much depending on of course, if it is a different sector, different product, maybe yes. Okay, so we did 2 rounds and 3 rounds in the knock-on effects. The way, basically, just to give you some sort of an intuition of how you would do this if you wanted to replicate this, it is described there. You would basically do something. Yes, thank you. So there is the direct loss, which is the multiplication of how much do you export of, from country and sector to the US times the tariff, let's say 10% or 20%, 25% in this case, plus multiplied by the import elasticity. So in one of the charts that I'm going to show you, basically this is like that. So this would be the direct loss. Then you have what affects to your domestic suppliers as Germany. And then therefore you say, okay, yeah, then I want to think how much of this car is really being produced by local providers. Then you want to do the same thing, but here you factor this equation by the share of domestic value added of that export. So of that car, how much is really produced by German producers in the components. And then you want to do this is because this will be the impact on the lower demand on those who are producing, I don't know, the window, the seat, or the things which are, or maybe the service, if you're talking. And then the same thing for the foreign suppliers. Here it is 1 minus the domestic value share. This is the foreign share. To do this, we were not so simplistic. So we went to every single country that we found in the input-output table, providing any minor input into German cars. So we look at this in all the countries that produce something. As you can see, we didn't have to go too far, okay? Because only 10 countries are supplying in Germany. Look, this is the car and car parts exporters to the United States. And basically, most of it is being exported by Canada, Mexico, Japan, of course, Germany, Korea. So these 10 countries account for 99% of the car and the car parts going from the rest of the world into the US. So when we look at the foreign value added going into Germany or into any of these countries, you have to do this not only for Germany, because remember that we wanted to look at this for all the European Union, so we replicated that for the 28 European Union countries. So I'm giving you the example, but this is, although it goes into a chart, it takes quite amount of, a lot of work, and this is why we are 7 authors here and not 1, okay? That's the advantage of working in groups. Because you have to do this, country by country, sector by sector, and then sum it up. What I wanted to show you is not only to illustrate how we did it, but also that the concept of domestic value added is particularly important here. As you can see here, this is showing the share of domestic value added in car exports. So we're trying to show here this part. Domestic value added, the share in exports, just for you to illustrate that. On average, that share is 40 to 70% in different countries. You have some countries which are exporting car or car parts to the US, like Hungary, which only 30% of what they're exporting is produced by their own producers. Let's look at Italy. So of the car and car parts being sent from Italy to the US, 64% is done by local providers. So very good in this respect in terms of domestic value added. You look at Spain, is what? My own country, 47%. The other day, a journalist was calling, okay, so what happens if they, well, Spain is, let's look at Italy. So Italy is selling $5 billion in 2017. We have the figures for 2018, but it's just we started this some time ago. Okay, so just we're selling 5 billion. So if there was total disruption, like no more car parts being bought from the US into Italy, of course you would have the direct impact, but then the indirect impact showing the domestic value added, you would see that 64% of that 5 billion would be the indirect going through the value chain into Italy, which is not a small amount. Huh? Okay, I don't know. It depends, of course, on how concentrated are the factories here, but it would be an impact. And this is why we think that these things can be useful, because if, I don't know, the European Union is going to activate at some point whatever the globalization fund or whatever the fund to try to compensate for trade tensions, you want to look at these things. I mean, you don't want to send money through structural funds and cohesion funds based on at the country level data and gross exports. You want to go a little bit deeper into the industries, the sectors, and which part is domestic value added, where, and what part is coming from elsewhere, because some of this thing is being produced outside, outside the European Union, okay? Questions?
Yeah, sorry, you don't account for tax revenues there, right?
No.
Because there's a loss also in terms of tax revenue.
Yes, there is a loss on tax revenue, and we don't account for it, but because that is not in the input-output table, we cannot.
No, I agree.
Yes, and you have a point there, yes. If you want to do this by country, you would have to, because you would have the information to discount that.
Right, but this is underestimation of the total damages.
It is a very rough, basic estimation. It could be multiplied, yes, of course.
So for the left-hand side graph, so with your data, you cannot disentangle car and car parts. Because car
Yes.
manufacturing is very interesting.
We cannot.
It's one of the few examples that, like, at the beginning they used car producing to explain about value chains, and nowadays we realize that it's much more regional value chains. It's factory Europe, factory North America, factory China, or like Asia. And I sense that there is a very little shipping of cars from Germany to the US, rather than maybe shipping engines and then producing them in Mexico, US, or whatever for the American market. But you cannot, even with why you could do that, no? With the
Because we don't have that detail in the,
not being invited, in why you have the details of
in what?
in the wording without
In WIOD, yes, but the problem is that for WIOD, we don't have the Eastern European countries. That's the thing, so we had to, there was this trade-off.
but they're not coming up like in this.
Well, they're not coming up, except for the fact, look, and this is when I'm gonna, you'll have to tell me when do I stop. I have until what time?
We have about 20 minutes, but we can share in the end of presentation maybe larger comments, quite a minutes.
Very good. So what do you want, how much longer do you want me to speak?
No,
Good.
you
I
go
can
on.
continue?
I do have remark.
Okay, so you want to ask something? Yes.
No, I agree
Ah.
with the point about the regional value chains, because of course there is the NAFTA effect, that's especially interesting that Canada and Mexico, anyway, there is an important part of imports and components under
Yes,
that
exactly.
effect. So, and of course the case of Hungary is so small amount of car exported and just local assembly.
Exactly.
So I think the dynamics of the regional value chains is very important in this situation.
So let me continue with this again. Even if I don't have time, I wanted to go slow in this part because this is what is the basis of our message. Then the rest of the work goes into more sophisticated ways to estimate the same, and then I can tell you much faster what we did and then the results, and then we can go into the questions. But further. But I think this is interesting. If we go into German, we look at German auto exports to the US. Again, here the focus was on Germany because when Trump announced the tariffs, everybody was scared about Germany. You can see that of German auto exports, 2/3 are domestic value added, is being produced in Germany. 1/3 is foreign value added, and who is providing that input into German cars and auto parts? The rest of the European Union, EU15. 50%, new member states 11%, so in total 61% of that 34% comes from the European Union, and then the rest comes from China, Japan, and even the US. So there are things that come from the US, go into Germany, and then go back to the US. This was a way, again, the World Economic Outlook, we made a global estimate of that, trying to show Trump, although it was not a well-received message, that by imposing tariff, they would be hurting themselves, basically, which was obvious. And here you have an example. You imposed on that, and then at least that is hurting you as well. So, well, going into this direct effect, remember the share that you export times the tariff times the elasticity, very simple accounting type of exercise through the input-output table. Then adding to that the indirect effects through domestic value added and foreign value added to get the whole value chain. We came up with an estimate of the impact of a 25% tariff on car and car exports, okay? We thought at the beginning this cannot be very high because gross exports of car and car parts, the European Union, to the US is only 0.3%. So the amount of car and car exports of the whole European Union to the US, not in billions, which is what you saw, but in terms of percentage of GDP, of European GDP, is small. Although the tariff is high, 25%, it is affecting a sector that is small. If we were to do this on olive oil and cheese and wine, which was announced yesterday, that would be a different thing. Okay, or at least the direct impact would be higher, at least in France and Southern European countries, of course, including my country. But here, again, in terms of European GDP, small in gross terms. So we thought, even if we map the losses, direct and indirect losses, the amount should be, it cannot be higher than this. And actually, it was 0.1% of GDP. So the loss in terms of when you do that, and why is that? Because of all the cars that are being exported from Europe to the US, domestic value added, European domestic value added is just a little part. The rest comes from Asia, that we assemble that, or from outside the European Union. We avoid the double counting, and then the clean loss is 0.1% of GDP. So not very high. So then you would say, okay, then why are you so worried? Why did you do this all this effort? Well, the effort was because we wanted to not only talk about the size first. This is just, again, just one tariff into one sector. If you generalize this, we were not allowing in this model for trade diversion, confidence effect, non-linearities. I mean, this was pure, simple, accounting linear thing. But what we know is that this is for sure going to be an impact. So 0.1% of GDP at the same time, because it is very concentrated on particular factories in particular areas, then it can be very high. And also we wanted to look at the distribution. As you can see, look, for example, let's look at, for example, the Czech Republic does not even appear on this chart. So in terms of GDP, it looks like the Czech Republic is not going to be impacted in gross exports by the tariff. But when you look at value added, the Czech Republic is the fourth country most affected. Because most of the German production of cars going into the US is being produced in the Czech Republic. So in terms of value added, the impact will not be as much on Germany, although in Germany it's affected, but it would be the Czech Republic. Look, the Slovak Republic, we thought it would be very much affected, because in terms of percentage of GDP, gross exports from Slovakia into the US appear in terms of the GDP of Slovakia very high. But when you look into value added, the truth is that a little bit, only a little part of that is really Slovakia, produced by producers in Slovakia. So Slovakia goes, it is affected, but it's not the first country affected. It's actually only the third country affected in Europe. Okay, so this you can go in detail, and then our main message was that you can do this in every sector that you want to do this, and then both the size, you get a better sense of the size and a much better size of the distribution of your impacts. That was the whole purpose of the exercise. I'm not going to, well, this is again the Slovak and the Czech Republic, so it's just the same point that I made. Yes?
So this depends again if it's car or car parts, but it's like you're assuming a complete pass-through of the tariff towards like the next stage.
Yes, yes, that is precisely. Look, the caveats, you know that we want to be as transparent as possible in order to be able to replicate and as honest as possible as to the limitations of the exercise, okay? First, with this exercise, we made a strong case in favor of using value-added statistics instead of gross statistics, fine. But this network effect is really a short-term estimation. You're not taking into account second, third round effects. I mean, yes, in the network, but not in terms of the economic activity. The moment you impact a sector, what happens is that region and in the demand in that region and the GDP production and what happens there. You're not taking into account confidence effects, what is happening. Suddenly people not investing, not doing anything, and therefore is this activity, this GDP activity affected only by the tariff or something else? Potential spillovers, we're not doing anything like that. And actually we did not take into account trade diversion, which as we know, it is occurring. The moment a tariff is seen as permanent, producers will just look at something and say, let me just change my value change and my producers. It takes time because it's not easy to substitute your companions in the production chain, but you end up doing that, okay? So let me take, what do I have, 10 more minutes, 5 more minutes?
5 minutes.
Okay, so let me take 5 minutes to guide you through. This is slide 16. So I'm gonna go into 3 more slides of the 30. That was my purpose, because we have 30 just because typically we present this in different, places, just focus on the first chapter, the second or the third. Here I wanted to focus on the first one, but I wanted to also show you that we did 2 more things, okay? And then I'll go straight to the conclusions. The first thing that we did was to try and improve this estimate and bring a model, a framework, which was a demand model, meaning we take this paper, which is Bems and Johnson, if you know probably this one, in which they affirm trade today does not happen in terms of final goods, but basically there is world markets compete on demand for value added, not on final good, but demands for value added. This advocates for different types of measures. So they would be saying, not only you have to compare value-added exports with gross exports, but something that you guys, meaning all of us researchers, are doing wrong is that you're mixing concepts. The denominator should be different, meaning you can actually use value-added exports divided by GDP, because GDP is a value-added measure, but you cannot use, as you use in your statistics, as a measure of trade openness, gross exports divided by by GDP, because GDP is a value-added export. So you should use gross exports divided by gross turnover. So the amount of time that it passes. Well, for all of us here, we understand this, but it's not something that is done, and typically it's not done in the analysis. When you incorporate that, which we didn't in the first dimension, then of course the impact is higher. Okay? The difference between both measures is higher. Something else that we did is, as Bems and Johnson do, competitiveness, relative prices and competitiveness, which are always affected by the tariff, are captured by what they call value-added real effective exchange rates, which are different from traditional gross trade real effective exchange rates. And they are different in 3 dimensions. The weights, in the bilateral weights in the exchanges country by country, are different. Instead of being based, so the weight, if I am Italy, the weight that I give in my trade relationship to calculate that real effective exchange rate to the US or to Spain is based, instead of gross exports, is based on value-added exports. Same thing to the elasticity of substitution. It's not a standard. In the previous exercise, we used a standard elasticity of substitution for all the countries. Here, it goes by country based on the value added. Okay, so much more sophisticated. And then the degree of openness of that particular economy is not based on gross statistics, but also on value-added statistics. Okay, so the result of this, I'm going to go directly to the result. Here we show the different partner weights are similar. Value-added weights and gross weights are similar, but they're not the same. For example, look at Germany. The more you are in your value added, so the bilateral weights between Germany and Austria, Germany and Poland, Germany and the Czech Republic are a little bit lower in value added terms than in conventional terms. That is just precisely because the real exchange rates, effective exchange rates calculated with value added exports tend to be lower. There is less value added when you are in a supply chain. In every exchange, there is less value added than when you are not. Okay, we can go to that at the end. Let me just go. So then, elasticities are different as well. We don't use one elasticity. On the other exercise, we used 8% elasticity, whereas here we have different elasticities for different countries. The more you trade in intermediate goods, the lower is your elasticity. Of course, the more difficult it is to substitute somebody with which you exchange lots of intermediate goods. It takes time, okay? And then, let me go into the conclusion. And then the scenario that we show is that an increase in tariff of 5% overall, so it's not 25% in one sector, but 5% tariff across the board. Why a 5% tariff? Because in this case, it would be the case in which the US would go to the level of China. That would create an impact in European GDP of 0.2% of GDP. If you take it into account in value-added exports, you could go to 0.25, okay? And to conclude, let me go to the third scenario. So we did this, and then we go into growth shocks. So what would be a growth-related, because these trade tensions can create disruptions on growth. We go through the caveats, and then we did this in 2 steps. First, we did a principal components analysis to disentangle growth in the US versus growth in other countries to basically extract the common shock. And then the residual, we just interacted that with the GVC exposure in a second step, okay? With an impulse response function, local projection. And then what you see, and this is the last slide that I'm going to show you, what you see is that a 1% trade-related shock in the US, so imagine the US goes down by 1% because of the trade war with China. What will be the impact on European GDP? It will be the impact for the median economy, it will be an impact of 0.6%. So a 1% decline in growth in the US because of the trade war would impact those economies that are exposed in the median in Europe, 0.6%. If you're an economy which is heavily exposed to the US, say Ireland, highly exposed to the US, then the impact could be much higher. You could go to almost 1.5 percentage points of GDP. So the exposure to the US actually, as you can see, a growth because of the trade war shock in the US would affect Europe widely, even more than Germany. Germany, as you can see, a growth shock because of the trade war in Germany will not have such an impact, barely 0 point something, 0.1, 0.2. Why? Again, because there is only a little bit that is really autochthonous, that is only autonomous from Germany, okay? Overall, I can go into that. We do some sensitivity analysis. Main takeaways of our exercise is that global value chains matter a lot for these trade tariff tensions. We want to use value-added data. Germany is not as crucial when we look for Europe value-added data versus gross data. And we should be worried about the impacts coming from the US and China in this trade tension, okay? Because they're going to come directly and through global value chains to the European countries, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, before the coffee break, we have time for some, maybe some more general comments or questions on this presentation. Yes.
Yes.
When you talk about value-added trade, are you using the very famous database which was created by the three organizations, or you created your own?
No. We are using Eura. So TIVA is the one that was created by the OECD, and that we are not using that. I mean, we are not using in this report. We have it, but the reason why we didn't use it was just because it had less countries from Europe. That's the only thing.
That database was a bit old in the sense
Yes.
It was not, you know, it was, I remember when I was using it, it was always 4 or 5 years back.
Yes.
So I would use the general idea and then applying it to actual data, current data, exports and imports. On the contrary, you are using
So,
data,
yeah, we're using,
more recent data on the Adriatic trade.
yes, we're using IORA, which goes until 2013, and then we did extrapolate 2013, and then we did extrapolation. So
Okay.
we filled the data until 2016, and then we're using WIOD, which goes straight to 2016. WIOD database has data until 2016, and that is the one that we use, and that is, yes. So, I mean, again,
Yeah, it should
it's not 2019, so,
Yes.
but it's more or less.
shouldn't have changed.
Yeah.
Yeah, because of course it's very, terroir are very recent. So
Yes, yes.
Any other comments, Francesca?
I lost your reasoning about the ricochet effect on the United States from the lower trade with Germany. You said that, if I remember correctly, that in the German exports, you had 60% of German value added,
Mm-hmm.
and about 66% and 33% foreign value added. Of that 33%, or 7% was coming from the States.
Yes,
Then the overall impact would be about 2%.
yes, no, it's,
2% is not much.
exactly, it's not much, it's not, and you're totally right. What I was saying is that this was only for the car sector, and then there is another publication, which is not this one, and I went too fast, and I thank you for asking me. There is another publication, which is the World Economic Outlook, which came, you can just download it, April, which did this for all the sectors. And then for all the sectors, it was showing that the effect, again, for the car tariff is small, it's 2%, but then when you add the sectors, if you were to multiply the tariff war not only on cars but to other sectors, then the effect on the US would be much higher. And actually there is a scenario there, which I invite you to take a look, in which basically they look at the sectors that are affected vis-a-vis China and the ones that China is imposing on the US, and trying to show that both, but in this case more the US than China, are being impacted back precisely because some of the producers are going to be affected. Okay, so it was just a recognition and a mentioning of that publication. Yes.
Yeah, I would like to, if you can clarify a little bit about this idea of dependency or independency in terms of the German role. Because the idea that US and China have a large impact in Germany as independent source is one thing. The story of how much the EU member country depend on Germany as an hub, for example, in the car or the sector, is another story,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
So you could say that Germany is not as much important as independent source, although
It could be a
push-
transmitter.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's
That is the case. Very good, because this gives me the opportunity to show you this chart, which was in the appendix, which is precisely, we were puzzled by this, and we received lots of comments, including from ministries, saying, what are you saying? I mean, so Germany is not important anymore for Europe. No. The way we do this, I mean, for those of you who are the econometricians, when you do this in 2 steps, first you try to disentangle what are common factors. And the truth is that in the database from 1995 to 2017, when you look at the growth in the US, the growth in Europe, the growth in China, and you try to disentangle the common factors, every time that there has been a crisis and you extract the common factors, then the residual is accounting in every case for the autonomous factor in that economy. And that residual is what is used to do these impulse projections. What would it happen if there would be a 1% shock with that coefficient into the other economy? What happens is that Germany, from 1995 to 2017, has not had any shock of its own. Meaning that every time Germany has decelerated, first, between 1995 and 2017, Germany has been growing most of the time. But even when it decelerated, it was because of the same reasons that the other countries in the world, meaning the global financial crisis. So the moment you take the common factor, either a trade slowdown, a financial crisis, anything that is common to all countries, you clean it. So that is not a domestic source of shock. The last time that Germany had a domestic autonomous shock was the reunification. Was 1989, 1991. So that is not there. So there is an explanation which is purely statistical. Okay, so in the last 22 years, Germany has not had a major source of its own domestic. So therefore, what you see, because these are spillover estimates once you have taken the common parts of the shock out. Okay, so that is the first thing. The second thing is that the U.S., the role of the financial crisis, the U.S. had a, so the financial channel is much stronger coming from the U.S. Any crisis that happens in the U.S. typically affects the rest of the world through the financial channel. And therefore, that is something that does not happen when the problem comes from Germany. Okay, and finally, there's a question about size. The U.S. is very large, so a 1 percentage point of GDP shock in terms of volume is so large that it has much more impact in Europe than it would have on Germany, because it comes, like that. Again, this is totally compatible with the fact that Germany could be a transmitter. As Professor Guerrieri said, Germany could be transmitting the shock coming from elsewhere, and actually this is what has been happening, but it is not shown there. When we allow for Germany to be a transmitter, look, Germany is here. When we don't clean the common shock, Germany, even if Germany is just 20% of the US economy, look, 1 percentage point of GDP of crisis in Germany is 0.6% of crisis in the rest of Europe. So it's a strong impact. Okay, so this is what we know and what we see. But in the other estimate, if we really want to clean the common shock, then it's much smaller. Okay, again, because this is the transmitter. So very good point.
Thank you for this clarification and for all the presentation. It would be very interesting to focus on other areas, especially Mexico.
Yes.
that,
Yes.
emerged from this presentation. So I think now we have a coffee break. We come back here at 6 p.m. for the roundtable.
Very good. Thank you.
Thank you very much.